Throughout this year, we'll gather and share Parks Associates' latest research on the video and connected entertainment industries with insights on consumer behaviors and preferences and the challenges for the video industry in meeting these expectations. After 2 years of virtual events, we are also announcing the return of our in-person events in 2022. We hope you join us in December as we gather again for impactful sessions with insights from industry leaders and best-of-class research from Parks Associates analysts. Nothing beats the knowledge, conversations, and community that come from meeting in an in-person setting. We survey 10,000 broadband households each quarter to provide the most reliable and accurate view of the OTT, pay TV, and digital media markets. Future of Video brings together industry leaders to share insights on new trends in the video and connected entertainment industries with insights on consumer behaviors and preferences and the challenges for the video industry in meeting these expectations. It features in-depth consumer and industry research on OTT services, the value of content, and best strategies for building successful video services for today's connected consumers.
Hello and welcome to today's Future of Video session where we will be focusing on the impact of digital piracy on the streaming ecosystem. I'm Jennifer Kent, Vice President of Research at Parks Associates, and so pleased to welcome you today. Throughout today's session, you will hear from a variety of industry leaders on this really important topic. We're going to start off with some analyst insight and research from Steve Hawley, who's the founder and managing director of Piracy Monitor and also a senior contributor working with Parks Associates. We'll have a panel with representatives from Cinemedia, Verimatrix, Nagra, and Friend MTS to talk about the innovative ways in which their organizations are detecting and fighting piracy. We'll hear a fireside chat with Marty Roberts from Bright Cove and our President and Chief Marketing Officer, Elizabeth Parks. And then there will be a full interactive panel talking really about provider concerns and the implications on business models for both piracy and credential sharing, and the strategies that their organizations are using to really optimize their business models. I'd love to thank the sponsors of Future of Video. We could not host these sessions without their support, so thank you so much to Audia, FPT, QuickPlay, Symphony AI Media, Comcast Technology Solutions, Metrological, MediaKind, and Friend MTS. And thank you, of course, to all the media and industry association supporters who also make today possible and really get the word out about Future of Video. If this is your first time joining us, we've been having conversations all year. As an audience member through the Swap Card platform, you can actually revisit the prior sessions and hear the great insights and conversations and research that we've shared throughout the year. So you can reference those conversations around OTT churn, video distribution strategies, personalization and viewing. We also welcome you to our in-person event in December, which will be in the Los Angeles area in Marina del Rey, California, where we have 3 days of industry-leading conversations and research to share. So please join us there. And I believe our call for speakers is open. So if you're interested in speaking at Future of Video, do reach out. We also welcome you to check out all of Parks Associates' executive events, whether that be Connections and Connections Summit, focusing on the full connected home landscape, our Smart Energy Summit, Connected Health Summit, or Smart Spaces, which is focusing in on multifamily, hospitality, and community living, and the technologies and services available in those properties. And if it is your first time interacting with us, you should know that Parks Associates is an independent market research firm. We've been in business for over 35 years, and we specialize in covering emerging consumer technologies. You'll see some of our research throughout our sessions today, so please let us know if we can help guide your strategic decision-making and product planning in any way. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Hawley to walk us through some research on piracy in the streaming ecosystem.
Hi, I'm Steve Hawley, and I'm the Managing Director of Piracy Monitor and a contributing analyst for Parks Associates. And in this segment, we're going to talk about piracy, the big picture of piracy. We're going to talk about what it is, what forms it takes, and also some of the ways that we can fight a battle against piracy. So before we get started, I thought it would be useful to frame the discussion in the uptake and the consumer demand for video services. Parks Associates did a consumer survey earlier in 2022, which updated a survey that was taken a year earlier, showing the intention of consumers to take paid video services. So these would be legally available services, online TV services, such as those we're all familiar with, the Hulus, Netflixes, Disney Pluses, and so forth, and also direct-to-consumer services. And then the other form of video is pay television, and those are on the right. You can see in both cases, between 2021 and 2022, consumer interest, consumer intention to subscribe to these paid services has been on the decline. So, in fact, Parks Associates found that there's been an enormous increase. 1 in 4 agree that movies and TV should be available for free online, which is an enormous percentage when you think of people intending to pay for services, and hopefully that the services are paid for. This is a huge risk for video providers. And well, why is it? Some people just believe the internet needs to be for free. Now, other people can't afford it. Of course, we're in tough economic times right now, and so people are trying to cut their budgets as much as possible. Some say, well, I don't do it very often, so it's okay. But for whatever reason, unlicensed usage has definitely shown a major increase. And in fact, there are ways, of course, many ways that a consumer can get video that's unlicensed. And you hear about these methods all the time. For example, people go to websites, which the industry calls IPTV sites. And through that, they look like pay TV, but they're really not. And you can get 1,000 channels and tens of thousands of movies on demand for a small price per month, or completely for free. Normally you would pay for those things, but those are widely available. Another are the illicit streaming devices, or in this case, they identify Kodi, which is one of the software media centers that you can put on a PC or a streaming box to get access to movies for free or a very low cost. The third example here, jailbroken streaming devices. So think of a streaming box or a mobile telephone that have been rooted or jailbroken so you can get past the authentication. If you add all those up, you'd think that those would constitute the majority of access to piracy. But as you can see by the bottom bars, piracy really happens in many other ways. And we're going to use the rest of this presentation to talk about those ways and then how to fight piracy. So we like to segment piracy. We'll talk about that first. Where does it happen, and then what we can do. So what is it? Well, I think we're all familiar with it being the theft of content. You hear the studios saying, hey, the such and such movie was available for weeks before we actually released it theatrically. And of course, that's a big loss for the studios or for TV programmers doing series television. And we know that today there are several very top tier television productions that have just launched into their first episodes, and already they're available through piracy. Another is the theft of services, and people like pay TV companies care about this. You're a pirate would be stealing their service, redistributing it illegally, for example. Another example, which flies a little bit under the radar, I think, for some people, is the theft of advertising. And so think of an advertiser that has a $100 million advertising budget. And there was a report done by the Digital Citizens Alliance not too long ago that said as much as 40% of legitimate advertising was finding its way to illegal or non-legitimate consumer endpoints. So if I had the $100 million ad budget and 40 million of that was disappearing into piracy applications, that should be a big concern, and it truly is. Next is the theft of infrastructure. So think of your CDN and your edge caching and the ways that a pirate could penetrate that infrastructure in a variety of ways. Another is the theft of software, and I would add to that the theft of use of your device. So think of someone who has downloaded an app, reverse engineered it, makes it look like a legitimate app, but really it's not. Then meanwhile, I receive an email as an innocent consumer saying, hey, download our new version of our app, it's ready. I click on the email and down comes an app that looks just like my pay TV provider's app or my streaming provider's app, but really it's not. It's just masquerading as that. It's actually an illegal app, and it's possibly a way for the pirate to download malware to your computer. And a week later, you might see a message on your screen saying you can't watch anymore and you can't unlock your computer until you pay us $600. So there's obviously an enormous risk there directly to the consumer, not to mention the theft of personal data. Lastly, and I use this as a kind of a catch-all category, the theft of you. I mentioned a couple of examples here. Another is large databases have been stolen from financial services institutions, from streaming providers, and then the pirate, through automation, will use that database and just make random hits on people's IDs and passwords. And whenever they get a hit, they set that aside and resell it, and then that's a profit center for the pirate. But that also, of course, exposes you and your personal information. So where does it happen? Well, in this green box is the safe world of legal or legitimate distribution of television services. Now, that could be from a pay TV provider through their managed network, and the user is authenticated. Once they prove that they are who they say they are, the service is unlocked and you can watch the program. Similarly, for an aggregator or a direct-to-consumer video streaming company, they distribute through the open internet, but again, they have to be authenticated and they're allowed in. So that seems to be well protected. It's a neat, tidy world. But before the video content reaches the distributor, there's no protection unless the entity that's distributing to that distributor has protected the content in some way. So that content can be intercepted in transport. That could be stolen during production. There are a lot of ways that programming can be stolen before it reaches a distributor. Similarly, once the programming has been unlocked and you've watched it on your device, let's say that you're a pirate and you've taken that content and stored it, whether it's through an app or through a download, or in some way you've saved it to a server and then you're redistributing it. The pay TV provider and the streaming provider in the green box have no way to protect that. Or actually they do, but they have to have those countermeasures in place. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So now within the green box, we also have risks. So during production, or as they package, or as they multi-encode the programming for distribution, that environment's not necessarily secure unless they put the right safeguards in place. Their distribution in their managed network could be subject to a man-in-the-middle attack or some other attack that that intercepts programming en route to the consumer. So those services and that content is also at risk, and that also happens at the consumer level. So why should video providers care about this? Well, obviously, the ability to retain revenue. They have certain revenue expectations around the legal distribution of their services, and that the people on the receiving end are legitimate recipients and that they're not stealing the programming. Also, they're concerned that whatever they're spending or whatever their advertisers are spending on promotion is effective and it reaches everybody. Next, there are contractual considerations. So the most obvious one is exclusivity. So thinking of a sports broadcast that only can be viewed at a certain time in a certain time window during its original broadcast, or think of a movie that's suddenly made available through a piracy site a week before release, or think of territorial exclusivity, where it's only available in outside of a blackout region or in certain countries and not in others. And if you allow, or if you, the video provider, were to allow that to happen, you'd be in violation of a contract. There's protection of your reputation. If I downloaded an app that I thought was legitimate and was attacked through it by a pirate, I might blame the video provider for that. So there's a risk to your reputation as a video provider. And lastly, how fast do those things need to be put in place? Well, some sporting events could be as short as a few minutes long, so it's in their best interest to make sure that piracy is detected and shut down as quickly as possible. I'll give you a couple of close-ups here, and we'll go on to remedies. The capture and playback. There's lots of places where video can be captured. You'll be able to view this presentation later on demand, so you can read all the categories, but you can see it can happen in the video player. It could happen somewhere in transit between the video provider and the consumer's home. It could happen through credential abuse, many different ways. Similarly, in the device itself, the session can be attacked, the player can be attacked. There could be attacks through a device's operating system. There are also attacks through hardware. And so to be aware that attacks could happen through all these different avenues, I think is very important for any video provider, because once they're aware of it, they can put countermeasures in place to stop that from happening. Let me wrap up by saying, just as piracy is an ecosystem, because you saw the end-to-end theft of content before, during, and after distribution, anti-piracy is also an ecosystem. And there are technical and non-technical countermeasures. The technical ones are things like making sure that your connections are known, your sources and destinations are known, IP addresses are known, you're able to identify the content and the streams that you're distributing, and also just making sure that what you have in place already, without adopting any anti-piracy specific technologies, make sure that you're enforcing limits on how many people in a household can watch, and also make sure that your things like DRM and conditional access are properly in place and your endpoints are known. Now, non-technical countermeasures extend from things like consumer education and also discussion among peers as to comparing notes as to what they're experiencing. There also are a variety of associations and also industry groups that will collaborate among operators of the same type, and they can exchange ideas and also formulate countermeasures as a group. You can work with your financial partners. So, any financial services institution cares about fraud, and it's really worth the effort to partner with them as well. There are some longer-term remedies, such as regulation. In fact, in the Asia Pacific region, there's a video industry group called the Asia Video Industry Association that works with legislators in countries in that region, and some of them have put site blocking legislation in place. And once those countermeasures, once that legal countermeasure was put in place, piracy fell by nearly half in some countries. So it was very effective. It took a long time to happen, but it did happen. So with that, I want to turn us over to the next session, but I want to thank you for your attention, and please feel free to subscribe to the Piracy Monitor newsletter. Go to piracymonitor.org, and thank you very much. Appreciate your time and your attention. Have a great day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Steve for that fantastic presentation. If you have questions for Steve, I believe he's also attending and watching the chat, and that's something that I didn't mention earlier in the welcome. So we do have question and answer tab in the viewing platform. So if you have questions for any of our panelists or speakers today, you're welcome to put them in either the chat or the Q&A tab, and our team will see those. And also, we have some polling questions in there. So we're very much interested in your perspective on this topic. We'll be looking at those results throughout our discussions today. So please go ahead and get your answers into those polling questions, and we'll pull them throughout. So very pleased to introduce our panelists of industry leaders. They have really a frontline view of what's happening and where piracy is growing. What are the most effective methods to combat piracy? And I'm going to ask each of our speakers today to come in and introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about themselves and their organizations before we get going. So I'm going to start with Steve Epstein, who's a fellow solution engineer with Cinemedia. Hi, Steve.
Hi, how are you? Thank you, Jennifer. I'm a fellow at Cinemedia. I've been there for 25 plus years. I'm the lead architect in the anti-piracy program. And what we're trying to do, using watermarking, monitoring, all sorts of intelligence gathering, automated takedowns, and all sorts of advanced disruption mechanisms, build an automated and scalable platform where we could detect pirates globally and automatically disrupt them once we recognize they're stealing our customers' video.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Looking forward to your insights on our conversation today. We also have Matthew Feit, who's the Chief Technology Officer with Verimatrix. Hi, Matthew. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Matt. I'm as Jennifer said, the CTO of Verimatrix. We're a company that's been around for more than 20 years and have really been focused on security and content protection for the majority of that time. We're also responsible for the security of some of the mobile app protection of some of the larger banks that you may be familiar with, and some of the larger automotive brands that you may be familiar with. And I've been with Verimatrix for, I think it's about 15 years. My first job at Verimatrix was in watermarking. Now I help guide the technical teams, and just really excited to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being here. We also have Sebastian Kramer, who's the SVP of Product Management with Nagra. Hi, Sebastian. And please tell us a little bit about yourself and about Nagra. I think you're actually muted, Sebastian.
Oh, sorry about that.
We can hear you now. That's great.
You can hear me. Yeah. Yeah, Sebastian Kramer. I look after our broadband products on the security side, as well as our OpenTV video platform in Nagra as part of the Godowski Group. In the Godowski Group, we have our digital TV division, besides our cybersecurity team, Skeet Data, and IoT team. And I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. We also have Chris White, who's the Operations Director with Friend MTS. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris White, Operations Director at Friend MTS. I've been at Friend MTS for almost 7 years now. We're a leading provider of anti-piracy and security services that help protect our customers' content and revenues. We've been doing this for over 15 years now. It's our exclusive focus, so we don't do anything else. We don't sell DRM or conditional access or OTT platforms or encoding solutions. So we're truly the independent voice when it comes to recommending the best approach for content security, rather than trying to sell packages of technologies just because they sit nicely alongside each other. As it says on the slide, we cover both live event, linear channels, as well as VOD or non-live content. But I'd say we're probably best known in the market as being specialists in live. As you can see, we work with some of the biggest names in kind of content broadcast and media around the world.
Fantastic. And yeah, that point on live content and how to protect live content, very tricky business. So we'll hear more about that from Chris. So let's go ahead and dive in. Matt, I'm actually going to start with you and then go to Sebastian to help us understand really the size of the piracy problem, Today, Steve showed a little bit of information that from the consumer perspective, at least, more consumers are admitting to pirating content than 3 or 4 years ago, right? What are you seeing from your side, and what is it costing brands and service providers?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, Steve's data was that captured my attention. That was really compelling. I think a lot of what we're seeing is consistent with that, and in the sense that he's showing year over year diminished demand from consumers, and largely probably due to piracy. And so I think, I guess from my perspective, I kind of came here with the idea that it's a now problem. It's affecting people today. It's affecting bottom lines today. People are spending money today, to protect and guard against it. And it's such an overwhelming, or such a large scale problem that can affect the quality of service for consumers, because now pirates, unlike the past, now pirates have the ability to consume, like, from the edge, from the CDN. And so now, legitimate subscribers are competing for the same resources that the pirates may be pulling from, and then that's going to potentially degrade the consumer experience, because now they may have more buffering, now they may have more delay, now they have more lag, and so I think the brands are aware of this, because if nothing else that we've learned, since post-COVID, is that D2C is so important, and it's become so competitive for these larger streamers, and retaining these eyeballs and not losing these eyeballs that are watching these streams, that they're having to invest more, and every day, piracy is taking content and putting it on these pirate distribution sites, or it can be, as I already mentioned, pulling it directly from the CDN. So I think the brands are suffering. I also believe, and because everything is now about audience, that there's a diminished amount of ad revenue, or ad revenues at stake. And Steve also brought up an interesting, Holly brought up an interesting point that we've seen directly, is there's so many attack vectors that pirates have, that it's not just the loss of ad revenue or ads getting to the wrong people, but pirates have the ability now, if you're not taking adequate protections, to take your app, to replace your ads with their ads, because piracy is can be a business for them. And so not only is there a loss of ad revenue, but now maybe your subscribers are getting the wrong ads that fit your brand. So I think there's a number of ways that we see the effect, and I also think that there's a vicious, certainly not virtuous circle, because the loss of revenues takes away from more investment in content, which leads to lower engagement from subscribers for the content that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Sebastian, to you, are you seeing, growth in piracy, and also maybe a different awareness of different players in the ecosystem about what it is costing them, right? Where maybe a couple, 5 years ago, it was maybe a way overlooked, a way to, gain eyeballs, but advertisers, content owners, service providers, do they see the impact today?
I think it's quite interesting. The streaming industry is waking up to security, and I think there's a fundamental difference. I look after the broadband business in Nagra, and I work very close with our broadcast guys. And in broadcast, in one-way broadcast, the security was actually fundamental to start your business. I mean, you couldn't start a pay TV service on satellite without encryption. I mean, it doesn't work, right? So what that brings is the difference between content protection and service protection. And what we talk about, lost revenues relates to service protection. In the traditional broadcast industry, you first think about service protection, and then I would say content protection actually is a side effect of it. And in the streaming world, it's actually quite interesting. It has evolved completely different. People didn't really care about service protection. If I'm a bit cynic, I would say that even the biggest streaming companies saw account sharing and other issues as marketing. Right, and now that the services are maturing, in the streaming world, actually, they're discovering that service protection is important to protect your business. Yeah, and I think so. It's quite interesting that the streaming world has actually started the opposite way, if you want, that the traditional broadcast world. But actually, at the moment, we're seeing that a lot of the old themes are coming back. So, coming back to the question of what's the size of lost revenues? I mean, the issue is that many of the priority sites, they look very professional, very genuine, bring good quality of service. So it's a real issue, and they charge money. I mean, you have, if you want to measure lost revenue, you can measure this in, IPTV subscription fees. So pirates charge subscriptions, undercutting the genuine services, the legal services, and they run advertising, which is actually fascinating. They run their own advertising, and we have done some studies there with DCA in 2019, so not so long ago, on trying to size the issue in the US market alone. And we came up to, lost revenues up to $1 billion. US market alone for IPTV subscriptions. And in advertising, DCA did a study on their own, and they came up with a number of $1.5 billion. So it is if the big streaming companies see those numbers, they obviously want to, bring that revenue onto the legal side. And I think that's what the discussion is about.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Steve, I'm going to come to you, and then Chris. Are there areas that you're seeing particular segments of the market or attack vectors that you're seeing really grow from a piracy perspective? So whether that be certain international markets or focusing on pirated live streams, or, we heard Steve talk about, new releases and the fact that if you have a new release that gets out to a market a week before the official release, you've lost all of those eyeballs. So any trends that you're seeing in kind of how the piracy or attack vectors are shifting?
So we actually monitor piracy throughout the globe. There are Ampere reports showing piracy in every country. Clearly, USA has the most amount of piracy. They say up to $13 billion of lost revenue to piracy just in the US alone. Those are numbers that are thrown out. But piracy is all over the place. It's in every country. India has huge piracy issues. Brazil, UK, live sports, I think, is the biggest piracy, just because it's expensive, and there is almost an addiction to live sports. We did a study, and we think that there's almost $28 billion of piracy, lost revenues of piracy in live sports alone. On the other hand, early movies, we have numbers like $1.8 billion were lost globally just to the 28 most popular movies. So the most popular movies and TV shows that just come out and live sports, those are the biggest piracy issues. And as we've seen in Steve's report, piracy in all those areas is just growing.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And Chris, anything to add from what you're seeing at the Friend MTS side, particularly with your kind of insight into the live aspects in the broadcast world?
Yeah. Picking up on what Steve said there, live sports is obviously a huge problem, right? Expensive content rights, expensive subscriptions to view that content. And really the separation now that we're seeing of those content rights, the fragmentation of those rights across multiple services, multiple providers, looking at MLB in the US recently, it's on Apple TV Plus now for Friday night basketball. It's on ESPN for Sunday night basketball. Peacock's got the Sunday afternoon games. So you've got kind of all of these different places where if you're a baseball fan, you've got to subscribe to multiple services, subscribe to multiple platforms to be able to watch that content that you want to watch. And I think pirates are getting wind of that and seeing themselves as kind of the aggregators of that content, being the one-stop shop that, sign up for my service, you can watch all of the content in one place, is a very attractive proposition for people. Picking up on the other thing that Steve said is obviously the exclusive entertainment content, so not just movies, but things that are really exclusive and really in demand across the globe. Things like HBO House of the Dragon. We had it with The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. These tentpole entertainment series where everybody really wants to watch it, but unless you've got a subscription to that exclusive platform that has it, you can't get access to it, and that is obviously a huge driver of piracy as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually don't know that I considered that before. And we do see a trend in the industry. We've moved away from pay TV, and so there's this great fragmentation in the market, and different types of platforms are trying to be play this re-aggregation role. But there's a fragmentation of aggregators, right? So
we see it globally. Like say, MLB in the US is a good example. In the UK, we see the Premier League. You got games on Sky, games on BT Sport, games on Amazon Prime. It's across the globe now that rights are starting to become more and more fragmented.
Now, what would you say, Chris, are the most effective ways to pick up on a pirated live stream? Let's focus on live, right? What are you finding are the most effective methods to combat it?
Yes, I mean the first thing, there's a few kind of key points to touch on. The first one is probably scale. So scale of content monitoring that you need to undertake to do this. Googling for things just doesn't cut it when it comes to looking for piracy. There's far too much out there to monitor that way. So you need a kind of a highly effective automated solution that's going to allow you to do that at huge volume. Everything from social media, open IPTV that Steve touched on in his introduction, linking sites, cyber lockers, tube sites, all of these places, and all these places where pirates either share their content or signpost to their content. They all need to be monitored, and obviously you can't do that manually. So you need technology such as video fingerprinting to identify what content is, so you can then narrow down very quickly and enforce on that content. And then obviously there's always new sources of piracy coming along as well. So that roster of places you're looking for content, constantly new ones being discussed on Facebook groups, subreddits, Telegram, Discord, all these places where pirates are going to discuss these need to be monitored as well. So it's a huge scale and speed issue that you need to be able to deal with, especially, as you say, when it comes to live.
Yeah, thinking about that speed issue with a live event, right? Is there a certain kind of amount of time that you get into an event where you've got to find and shut down streams, or kind of the cat's out of the bag? And
I mean, coming back to the sporting analogy, if you're looking at a boxing pay-per-view event, it may go 12 rounds, it may not. It could be over in a matter of minutes, and that is a very valuable, extremely pricey piece of content that we're dealing with there. So speed and speed of detection, and also speed of turnaround of enforcement, whether that be legalistic means or watermark extractions, etc., all have to be extremely fast and extremely rapid for live events.
Yeah, and I see Sebastian wants to hop in, and then I'll come to Matt after that.
And I think there's an important point. So automated monitoring and the scale of it, fully agreed. That's a very important point, and I think there's good solutions. But as Jennifer mentioned, live events, how do you act? I mean, acting is actually a problem, right? Because if you identify the problem, okay, you can go through processes and whatever to take down pirate services. It's fighting windmills. That's how I call it, right? I mean, you shut down some, others come. We know the game, right? I appreciate that we all need to be technology agnostic, but actually technology is very important. And I think, for example, the content owners and the service providers, I mean, particularly content owners, they're selling their rights for so much money. The rest is not their issue, really, right? And there's a change, and technology can make a difference there. I mean, watermarking is interesting, right? I mean, if you fight piracy with or without watermarking, has a completely different quality, right? If you are able to tag the live stream watermarked, you can shut down in real time the source, meaning the pirate loses his source, meaning he can't run his service, right? So this is if you bring in technology, you can be very, very efficient to fight piracy, and otherwise, I think it's a very difficult game.
Yep, and go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, thanks. Everything Sebastian said and everything Chris said, fully agree. The scale is big. I don't know that we can catch up with the how fast you need to act actually. So I still think this is where we may be lagging, and we need to find better ways. And you asked how soon. And Chris said it right. It could be this long. It could be this long. And when you're talking to the provider or the pay TV broadcaster or whomever is publishing the content, they'll tell you that the first minutes and those streams are so important as those connections are happening, and during that time is when you're also trying to identify and track the source of piracy, which pardon. In the 15 years I've been doing this, back then it was a forensic game, and now we've got this great and tremendous volume of data, And again, everything I'm saying, I think Chris already said, you got to have efficient index or a good index of piracy sites. You got to be watching social media. You got to be looking for places where people are saying that they found this thing or they're consuming this content. And that's a costly that can be costly if not managed well. And so I think maybe more innovation needs to be done to make it more efficient, or we need to find more predictive ways. And this is maybe the intersection of the AI and ML. You're trying to look for the signals that maybe tell you where piracy is going to come from and target on that area, so you can do a more efficient search. So there's this is a big hairy problem, but that's, I imagine, why several of us have lost hair over the years.
Yeah, right. Steve, I'd love to bring you in on the back of that conversation too. And, to Matt's point about where does the technology need to go next, right?
Mhm.
Kind of where's the bleeding edge of being able to be predictive or use AI and ML? What are you seeing as maybe effective today, and what's the next step?
So I think that you have to divide what can you do before the live program and what do you do during the live program. Before the live program, you have to be scanning the world, scanning these IPTV sites, doing searches, look at social media advertising, look at any aggregated lists, look at traffic patterns, look at various websites and how they're formed, look at what technologies, the different, they're using Cloudflare, they're using self-signed certificates, etc. There's so many different indicators of piracy, and you could build a big ML model to go and find a lot of the pirates. You need to keep a database of all the pirates and how much piracy they do throughout the globe. That's something which has to be ongoing 24/7. When it comes to a live event, depending on who is the provider and where that live event being shown, you're not going to be able to go through every suspected pirate and capture a video clip to do a watermark detection or capture a video clip to do an automatic DMCA takedown. So per campaign, you need to prioritize which of those pirates you think are the most problematic for this service provider, for this piece of content. And then you prioritize and you go through those and you take your clips, you do your automated takedowns, you do your automated water detection and disruption of the source, you do your IP blocking, and you get as many of those pirates to be disrupted during that live event as possible. Another important thing is when to disrupt. In other words, you want to disrupt in a way it's going to hurt the pirate viewers the most. And you want to build a whole strategy around disruption. You may want to disrupt one live event, but not the next. Every other live event, you may want to do great quality. I know this is a different question, but by choosing the right strategy, you're going to frustrate the pirate viewers, especially for live content, in a way that you have a better chance of converting them. So all this together of this research in terms of who are the pirates, the prioritization of which pirates are appropriate for this campaign, the going after those particular pirates and doing a very fast detection or takedowns or watermark detection and disruption, IP blocking, etc., and the strategy of how to disrupt. All of those are critical, and ML can play a lot of roles, along with, of course, fingerprinting and logo detection in those areas. So it's a full gamut of technologies. Everything has to be automated and everything has to be scaled and everything should be in the cloud because that's the only way you can scale properly.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about, trying to make as much disruption to the experience as possible. You're disrupting the pirates, but also, you want to make the experience poor for the consumers of the pirated live streams, right? And give them a reason to pay or access authorized streams. One thing I think is really interesting, Sebastian, actually, I think we talked about earlier that you brought up was when you think about the challenges of rolling out a anti-piracy strategy is around services that have been on market for a while. So we're at a place with OTT services that some have been on market for almost a decade. Some are still kind of greenfield, right? New services. Can you talk about some of the challenges about updating the infrastructure or the services that kind of have a legacy model versus outfitting a new service or with what they need today?
Yeah, so I mean, the streaming guys are, I think, at the beginning of the learning curve, how to design security in. And as security guys, we always know security is best designed in at the beginning and not after. But then I think in the streaming world, the life cycle, it's going pretty fast. So that helps, of course, to bring in security. And then you need to do right now everybody talks about CDN leakage. Right, there is a famous platform DRM which is compromised big time, and pirates are, through that, pirates are able to pull off the content from some of the major operators, and that's actually a double hit. You not only lose the revenue to a pirate, on top of that, the pirate is stealing your CDN capacity because he doesn't even share the content; he just pulls it off your network, right? So as an operator, that's a double hit, and we see that operators are getting very sensitive, particularly to that. And I sometimes make the joke that in the old broadcast world we had conditional access or controlling access. So now with CDN leakage, all of a sudden we need to control access to a CDN. That's an equation we understand very well. So you need to have strong session management. You need to have strong authentication. As said before, you need to have strong security analytics. But this is all the operator perspective. And I always say, most operators and service providers, they're actually usually the good guys, right? And they're evolving on security. I'm not very concerned there. This will happen, right? But the piracy we talked about before is really industry piracy, which is independent of the individual operator, and that's the problem. So a single operator, or it's very difficult for a single operator to actually make an impact on piracy in his market. And I think it's actually very important to address it as an industry issue. And we have seen in many markets alliances of service providers, content owners, and also platform owner, device makers to team up. We have Alianza in Latin America with the Operation 404 in Brazil, part of it. We have AAPA in Europe, or the MENA coalition in the Middle East, just to name a few. And I think some of the leading service providers understand, okay, we need to address this issue. It's really a common issue. We need to team up and define a strategy, like with many of the points which were mentioned before, to address this. And it's I think it's a common thing, and I think that's very important to evolve to.
Absolutely. Now, if you haven't answered the polling questions yet, I'm about to reference some of the results. So kind of last call to get your answers into those polling questions. Before we do that, one thing I wanted to come back to on kind of the live conversation for you, Chris, is a totally different type of thinking about piracy live, where someone's not necessarily pirating the stream, but they're in attendance, right? And there's all sorts of live streaming tools, right? And that with attendees, right, actually live streaming to various live streaming platforms while they're actually there, in attendance. So are you seeing much of that behavior, and how much do you think that's a threat, or that services or content owners are paying attention to live streaming from attendees at events, or it could be at films?
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot of that stuff obviously is shared on social. So there's obviously tooling within a lot of the big social media platforms like Facebook Rights Manager, YouTube Content ID, platforms like that allow you to kind of do some of that. But then there's some of the social media platforms that are probably falling a little behind where they should be, the likes of, TikTok and Twitter and places like that, where, it's not as easy to clamp down on this content. And it comes back to that scale of monitoring and finding that content on those huge platforms, which is obviously problematic. The other bit is really what we haven't talked about really around detection is kind of user analytics. Mm-hmm. So look, those platforms being able to look at the behaviors of their subscribers on their platforms, and actually being able to analyze, behaviors and trends. Obviously Netflix is very big about talking about credential sharing at the minute, but that's only kind of one aspect of it. There's lots of different ways you can kind of detect user behavior from those analytics, from those logs, that allow you to kind of identify pirate tendencies, pirate behaviors that could indicate that somebody's doing something they probably shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think that services are able to use those user analytics today? Are they able to detect piracy, or detect maybe a red flag and give warnings? I mean, what sort of action then do you take, right, depending on what you're seeing out of the user analytics?
Yeah, I think, like I say, there's we call them personas. So there's numerous different personas you can identify. Like I say, credential sharing is just one of them. Two people logging in from disparate locations consistently with the same set of credentials. There's obviously, pirate behaviors where, if somebody's logging onto a service and constantly watching the same piece of content or the same linear channel for extremely long periods of time, that I'm talking, days on end, that unusual behavior patterns, people who are watching from server, infrastructure server IP addresses rather than residential broadband addresses. All of this data you can kind of mine and analyze to look at these behaviors and identify things that are not necessarily indicators of behavior, but certainly things to investigate and definitely, interrogate further.
Yep. Now, if I look at our polling results, one of the questions that we asked is, where is your organization most impacted by piracy? And the options that we gave folks are loss of subscription revenue, loss of advertising revenue, negative impact on the brand and your brand experience, and exposure to IT threats. 80% are saying loss of subscription revenue as the number one, right, impact on their business. Nobody picked exposure to IT threats, but that's a very real issue, right? Besides the loss of revenue, exposing the end user who's viewing pirated streams, right? But then also the kind of cybersecurity element of it. So maybe I'd love to go to Sebastian and then Steve there for your takes on, the danger of pirated video to consumers and what, cybersecurity threats that organizations are opening themselves up to, depending on, their sophistication of their technologies.
Yeah, so we as a Kudelski Group, we diversified over 10 years ago from digital TV security to cybersecurity, which is actually not DTV centric. It's actually a generic enterprise business because cybersecurity is not a media-centric issue. It's a generic IT issue. And we're in that business now for over 10 years. And what we did recently, maybe in the last 2 years, is we tried to combine the service and content protection we talked about earlier with our cybersecurity solutions. And I mean, we see very strong traction on that and very strong demand. I mean, we are strategic security partners to large operators like Telefonica, Vodafone, Altice Group, etc. And we more and more get asked, okay, service content protection we understand, but what can you do about our cyber threats? And there are real threats. I mean, there have been some well-known industry incidents with some of the big operators where they have been hacked on the IT infrastructure side, and that can be very embarrassing. That can be, that's really a hit on reputation and everything. People are very, very sensitive to that. So we're combining those technologies, those two approaches very, very closely. That's very important to us. We actually won an award at IBC just now, CSI Best Cybersecurity Product and Service Award, apparently. And we're proud of that. And it's a real topic. It's really important. And I think in some discussions, in the real security discussions, it actually becomes a more important discussion than protecting the content. Protecting content at the end of the day is a content owner's issue. I mean, they need to act on that. The service provider needs to protect their revenues. But as I discussed before, for a broadcast-centric solution or for a connected solution, actually, this is very different, very different métier. But if you're connected, then cyber threat is huge. I mean, there's some CAS guys here. We locked CAS systems in a room without any connection to the outside world. There was no cyber threat. That was easy. Those days are gone, right? I mean, everything is connected, and that means you have a cyber threat everywhere, and that's actually bigger than just talking video.
Yeah. Steve, do you have anything to add on it? And do you think that consumers who do access pirated streams really understand what they're opening themselves up to?
No, I mean, there's the issue of, definitely we see a lot of the pirated open websites have malware. Some of the players will have malware. I mean, you don't really have malware in the video itself. The video is just bits and bytes, but definitely the player and definitely the open websites are known to be malware. I think that the motivation of getting the content they want when they want it for free makes them less prudent about the threats they're opening themselves to. And therefore, when they go to these open websites, especially the more seedy websites, they may end up taking a huge hit by having all sorts of malware and even ransomware downloaded from these sites. So I think the answer is no, and I think that is some of the consumer education that needs to happen in order to help the consumer and also stop piracy.
Yep. So looking at one of the other results from one of our questions, we said, do you have anti-piracy countermeasures in place right now? And 40% said, yes, under development. 40% said not in place, or another 20% said no plan. So reach out to these folks, guys, if you don't have anti-piracy countermeasures in place. I'm sure that they'd all be interested in telling you about what their technology does. We have just a few minutes left, and so I did want to take one of the questions from the audience. One of the questions here is actually kind of a perfect setup for the panel later that's really focusing on the business model side of things. But, one thing that we're seeing in the streaming space in particular is a real diversity of business models, right? Where folks who may have been subscription only are adding ad-based tiers, whether that be a fast type linear live ad-based experience or an AVOD experience. Do you think, from where you're sitting in the industry, that having a free tier, access tier, will help to bring down some of the pirated views, right? If there are more, low to no cost options to getting the content that people want to see, will that help them steer away from making that choice to go with a pirated stream? Maybe I'll start with Matt here, and if anybody else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought, and maybe I've never considered that before. But yeah, I guess reducing the cost barrier, and picking up on a point I think Steve made is, I think of myself as a sophisticated user, consumer of content. So I don't want to go somewhere where I'm scared and going to get malware. But I play IT for my family, and so my mom, she might go somewhere where somebody told her to go. And so I feel like that's an interesting idea, that if it costs less to consume content and people can get it from a trusted app or a trusted site, like a studio or a streamer that they're comfortable with, and has great brand reputation and recognition. What's interesting to me is that I still see friends of mine, again, I would think that they're sophisticated users, and then they'll tell me about some name I've never heard of, and they say, do you think this is piracy? And I'm like, well, what makes you think this is piracy? And they get, well, I can watch whatever I want for free. And then I ask them about the experience, and they say it's a terrible experience, it never works, and I see a bunch of ads all the time. Yet they're still compelled to go consume something for free, or a sports event in a market in which they don't live, or they do live. So I think it's an interesting idea. I think it's possible. And I guess the ripple effects of what's going to happen now that we have these new low tier, AVOD tier subscribers from these bigger brands, it's definitely going to have an impact. It'd be great if it has a better impact for our consumers, but maybe less of an impact for my business.
Yeah, go ahead, Sebastian.
I think there,
Oh, and then
but
Steve.
I mean, maybe the piracy, maybe VAS services, advertising-based services, maybe you can bring some illegal services back. But I think the prime motivation in the developed markets, and I think that we need to differentiate there in the developed markets where content has a high value. Like Steve said before, the big numbers of lost revenue. I mean, this is in the developed markets, right, where people run a big business. The motivation for advertising-based services, I think, is less based on piracy. I think it's based on that there's a ceiling on how many subscription you can take, because the content is fragmented. We talked about that before, right? You take Netflix, you take Disney, HBO, and then at some point you stop. So if you want to bring your content to a consumer, but the consumers don't take new subscriptions anymore, then advertising-based is a good option. And then you have another issue that the wallet of consumers is particularly these days getting smaller. So that's another motivation for advertising. So in the mature markets, I'm not so convinced on that the motivation could be to bring illegal users back. But in the developing markets, that's a completely different thing. Because I mean, you see some of the big content owners, some of the big sports leagues, they try now to license their content. They license it for the developed markets. They still need to grow the revenues. They can't grow their revenues in the developed markets anymore. So they need now to go to the emerging markets. But they have faced an issue. These emerging markets have no attitude to pay for content. You can't lose any revenues because there aren't any. Well, I'm over-aggregating. Of course there are, but I mean, it's a different game. And there, I think advertising-based services are an interesting way to tackle, to bring those developing markets, to develop those markets.
Steve, last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that, as I mentioned, the biggest problem with piracy is the best, newest, series episodes, the new box office hits, the biggest sports programs, be it Indian Premier League or NFL, NBA, and I think those still will be paid for. It'll be hard to get free with streaming services with advertisements, and that's where the piracy is going to be, and that's what people want to save a lot of money to watch those in pirate services. So I think it's a limited effect in terms of prevention of piracy. AVOD will have.
Well, that's a perfect point to end on because we are out of time, but a great setup for the other discussions we're having as part of this session, really focusing on the business models. And so thank you all so much, Steve, Sebastian, Chris, and Matt, for your time and sharing your expertise with our audience. Very much appreciate your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So next up, very much looking forward to this fireside chat with Marty Roberts from Bright Cove. Give us just a minute and we'll be back.
Since empty offices, video conferencing, and virtual events, working together in new ways, and finding unique ways of connecting with each other, we at Parks Associates are excited to see you face-to-face to collaborate, network, and innovate. We've brought back in-person conferences in 2022. Join us in December for the next in-person Future of Video, OTT, Pay TV, and digital media. We look forward to seeing you soon.
Welcome back. What a great conversation that was. Thank you to Jennifer for leading that. I'm Elizabeth Parks, President and Chief Marketing Officer of Parks Associates, and I'm so excited for this next conversation. Marty Roberts is Senior Vice President of Product Strategy and Marketing for Bright Cove and is going to join us and share his experience, starting with what happened at IBC just a couple weeks ago, as well as the impact of piracy on OTT services. Marty joined Bright Cove after the organization's acquisition of Wicket Labs, where he was CEO and co-founder. We're going to be taking questions throughout the conversation, so please go ahead and use the chat or the Q&A box for any questions you have for Marty. I will be incorporating those through our conversation, and let's go ahead and bring Marty onto the screen and start out with a brief introduction. So Marty, it's great to see you again. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself. And the first thing I really want to touch on is what happened at IBC and any of the highlights you'd like to share with our audience.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me today. So introduction for myself. Yes, I'm running product strategy and marketing for Bright Cove. I've been in the streaming technology space for probably way too long, starting in 1996 as a product manager on Real Audio and then Real Video. So been part of the industry for a long time. And actually today's conversation has been part of that conversation from the very beginning. IBC was fantastic. It was fantastic to be back. The customer conversations, the partner conversations, the whole just industry getting together felt more like a reunion than anything else. And that was it was so fantastic. At the same time, I think some of the innovative things that we saw a lot of conversations across about improvements in overall video workflow relative to, in Bright Cove's case, rolling out low latency live. And that was a conversation at a lot of different vendors that were in this space today with a lot of different customers about where it's applicable and where not. We saw a lot of conversation about analytics, which is a subject I love, and especially about where you draw the right line around applying machine learning and AI, where it's most applicable, where it has the most value, and actually in those cases where we can actually back off and get to most of the same value for a tenth of the cost by using smarter insights and better analytics relative to that. So a lot of good conversations kind of across the board there. But in general, it was just, I take a lot of energy from actually meeting with everybody, all of our customers and our partners. It was fantastic. So, yeah.
Well, we didn't attend this year, but we're watching all the news that was coming out, and so glad to hear that event went well. And really getting back to in-person events is, I think, important for the industry. So I'm so glad it went well. Let's get into this topic of piracy and some of the things that have changed over the past few years. We've been doing a lot of research in this area over many years, and as it's been noted in the previous conversation, piracy was really looked at perhaps as a marketing tool, the ability to get content in front of more viewers, and perhaps overlooked now in some ways by many of the streaming providers. So share with us from your view on what's changed over time here in the past few years, where this is really being looked at as a problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, it's a great conversation point. So we kind of divide it into two simple areas, just to rationalize it. There's the content protection side of the business, and that's an ever-evolving story. You can never give up on that because there's always somebody challenging and looking for a way to crack the system and things like that. And so we work with our partners, whether that's on stream encryption through a CDN system, whether that's on employing DRM, using key rotation on live streams, all those good practices, even up with our partners around watermarking particular videos for screener applications like we run with several of the major award shows and things like that. So really at all levels, it's how do we protect that content and make sure the consumption of that content is for the intended audience. Then there's the second half of that equation, which is how do we create secure audience experiences for those audience members? How are we looking at their registration? How are they logging in? And that's where a lot of the conversation is tipped into. I think, credential sharing is very real. And to your point, some media organizations really treated that as it was a marketing expense, or it was just a way of, I think, the joke was, even 10 years ago when Game of Thrones ended, 15 million people watched it and they only had, 9 million online subscribers, or, so clearly it was something they saw a benefit of in their business themselves. Now, as we've seen some of the subscriber numbers start to top out across those services, audience acquisition becomes more and more difficult over time. There's a real question about, can you start to increase your average revenue, or can you increase your number of subscribers by kind of squeezing or clamping down on a bit of that credential sharing? And there's some easy ways to approach that. 2 concurrent logins at the same time on the same credentials from different places. You can put concurrency caps in. The more difficult challenge is always, using the data, and they talked about it a little bit in the last session, to heuristically identify patterns that are abnormal towards standard login, and do a little bit of outreach, maybe even just proactively market against those particular customers to sign up for more accounts, things like that. So it depends on how kind of draconian you want to get as it goes, and there's a lot of nuances to the data that we have to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And all that data is telling a story to those service providers in terms of, how much they want to invest in figuring out, how to determine or share credentials, and effectively have to introduce new models, right, to be able to cover, perhaps a family share plan, have a core person and 3 other logins. And this is actually a lot of work, right, to invest in the different technologies that would enable new ways to log in, as well as figuring out, the transition happening, particularly with the hybrid models and coming in with different tiers of offerings that have to do with advertising. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the technology that's enabling all of this in the background to actually have some additional controls in place for these service providers. Can you touch upon some of the things you all are working on in that area, and maybe explain a little, how this tech is actually implemented to be able to help this issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, again, of course, there are the standard applications of where people can log in, how they can log in, all the things like geofencing and detecting for proxies. These are things that have just been baked into the core system that we have today. Again, we can implement concurrency caps. So if the same credentials used at the same time on the same stream or on the same content or with the same service, of course, we can flag that and say, hey, this isn't quite right. The more interesting thing that we're still digging into, and I wouldn't say it's totally solved yet, is starting to identify that, as I mentioned, the heuristic around credential sharing, it's maybe not at the same time. Okay, so 2 different geolocations based on resolving their IP addresses, same credentials, that seems suspect. But is that just a second home of that particular person? I spent 10 years of my career at Comcast, and a good percentage of their customers, they could identify they were also subscribers at a vacation home or things like that. That's a real use case that we have to identify. And for customers that are used to taking their video service with them wherever they go, whether they're on the road or they're at that vacation place, that's a real issue. And so we have to identify those types of patterns. And when does it tip into abuse? And then based on that, identifying those customers that may be kind of in that, potentially abusive or not abusive, but sharing scenario. Again, what's then the right response to that? Should we shut down some of that consumption? That's absolutely the case in some cases where we have very secure, very private content for specific audiences. But in other cases, maybe, again, it might be just nudging them along with some proactive marketing about signing up for family plans, things like that. And so there's definitely a really interesting kind of dynamic that's going on there about analyzing the data in a very deep way, identifying these patterns, and then working with our customers proactively to implement, kind of round trip that data right back into a marketing system or some other place where they can send a good email notification or an in-app notification that might promote that family plan, things like that.
Sure. And so, you get back to this, the data issue, and we know how important data is these days for services, particularly in the ability to personalize offerings for consumers, but even more so, maybe that segmentation in the background that a company can get on a group of customers, and then be able to understand their habits better, not just with perhaps credential sharing, but maybe even the whys behind it when you look into the content mix that they're getting at, and then therefore that engagement strategy with outreach and additional marketing, which of course is to help retain, but also perhaps grow that customer in the future. So any other comments that you want to make on how important data is and the role that it's playing, you know, not just with Piracy, but with everything within streaming services? This is an area we're doing a lot of work in understanding all the different aspects of data and then how that can be applied. There's so many real, you know, solutions out there that are different and differentiated based off of the data that they're, you know, choosing to look at and then pursue for new personalization types of offerings.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely the you know, there's lots of innovation happening across the entire industry. Of course, and IBC was a great example of that. But I think that the ability to harmonize data from all kinds of different data sources that sit around our digital video experience today is one of the most ripe areas for innovation and really enhancing our relationship with our audience members in general. So that might be identifying those audience members, that cohort that's just drifting away from the service because they just finished their favorite show. Well, you're never more at risk than after, you know, you just finish your favorite show. How do we bridge that into a hidden gem that might be in the back catalog, but the data shows us really compelling content? So when people watch those two shows together, they tend to stick around a lot longer and make it into the next month and the next month and the next month. And same thing applies for our advertising businesses as well. You know, we find that good lifetime relationships with audience members, it's not necessarily about the intensity, which of course I want people to watch more content in an ad business, but actually developing a long-term relationship with that audience member is to get them to come back on a more frequent basis. If we can increase our weekly active usage versus monthly, it's always a good sign that even if they're coming back watching 20 minutes of content here, 20 minutes of content next week, things like that, that speaks to a habit we're forming with those audience members. And these are all ways that we can identify those cohorts and then give them the right nudge in the right direction, an in-app notification, an email that says, hey, we've got another great show for you, or there's a new big event coming up this weekend, or you know, how do we personalize that? Either the user experience itself or the marketing that goes out to them. And that all comes from the data that we have and how we process it. And then most importantly, how do we set that data up into a system like an in-app notification system or a marketing system to go take action against? It's a really kind of fun and innovative way of, and it doesn't take a lot. It's actually a pretty low bar to actually get some great utility from that data.
Well, yeah, and certainly the partnerships that we see evolving now, but also that are getting introduced, things we've really never seen before with video services partnering with, you know, all sorts of different brands and entities. That is really the behind the scenes there is all to keep that engaged consumer. And leveraging, you know, different brand identities and things, you know, about what attracts certain segments to this brand or that brand and tying it into that service offering. So I think the partnership play is going to continue to be a really big one that we'll be watching. We've been talking a lot about the consumer-driven side of things, you know, password sharing and credentials, but let's talk a little bit more on these professional entities that can come in, you know, and distribute content that they shouldn't be. Do you see one, you know, either side of this being where companies should be paying more attention? Is it these professional groups that are doing this, or should time be spent over in the consumer side and trying to control that more?
Yeah, you know, I mean, you can never discount for any one of these businesses. You know, it's the equivalency of a retailer and shoplifting. Of course, you're going to spend time looking for other ways to secure the property that you own until that consumer happens. But I think that the majority of time, and so that's going to be a focus always. But at the same time, the majority of effort is by creating a great consumer experience. You touched on this idea earlier of introducing the hybrid models of lower price points with advertising, making it more accessible for more audience members that are out there. You know, in general, creating that great consumer experience, creating that great personalization that leads you into that next great show or into that next great film. These are all ways of essentially driving more audience members into your controlled and into your monetized environments today. So, we spend a lot more time with our customers, really focused on that side of the business. And I don't want to discount the other part of the kind of big piracy that can happen in the market today. But really, focusing on your audience is always job number one, and that's where we spend most of our efforts.
Okay, great. And what about, being able to actually secure this experience that consumers are having? I mean, how much emphasis has to be put on those protections that get built in? And of course, this is an area at Parks that we talk about so much in the connected home space. You have all these connected devices. There's so much vulnerabilities across the home where, somebody's got to be working on the added protection for the network, for the devices, for the broadband services. And so tell me a little bit more about these secure experiences and maybe even specific things that are being introduced in the market that weren't before as a result of the technology.
Yeah, so, so there's kind of two levels of that conversation. One is, we always have a conversation with what is secure enough. And then the second part of that is, can we abstract how complicated it actually is behind the scenes? So can we make that a check mark for our customers? And so when they say, yes, of course we want to enable DRM, great. Well, that's just a check mark. Let's turn that on. Or actually, stream encryption is probably good enough. It's more secure than a broadcast, actually. And so, there's all these different levels of that level of security. All the way up to, as I mentioned, we do these screener applications where we individually fingerprint every single video that goes out and is distributed, so that if one of those videos leaks because it's pre-release or whatever the case is, we know exactly who that video was targeted for. And so it's an individualized video stream for each individual that's actually consuming it. So that, for us, our job is to obscure that complexity for our customers so they don't have to worry about it. So it literally is just a check mark of, hey, let's turn that on and we'll make that work for you today. And so that's a really important part, and it's an important conversation we have with our customers today. And then it comes down to, okay, great. Now, how do we create a secure experience on the other side as people are logging in? What are their credentials? Do we want to employ a two-factor authentication? Do we want to use single sign-on from some other application? These are all technologies that you just have to integrate with to make sure that we're addressing some of the needs that our customers have about even who can access the service to begin with and actually see what content is available. And so, again, it's always a conversation, and there are varying levels of security that our customers may choose to employ. But it's, the job's never done because you're always looking for the gap. You're always paranoid about where's the hole, as we should be, appropriately paranoid. And so, we're constantly monitoring that. But at the same time, we feel like for our customers, we have the check marks that allow them to feel, sleep good at night, that their content's not going to be, that this is not going to be the leaky part of their content distribution strategy. So.
Yeah, and how much time are you all spending explaining all these vulnerabilities to the companies that you're working with? I mean, is there, are people already educated to what they need to know, or do you find yourself in the position of being that educator and helping them understand, the threats that are a reality?
Yeah, I'd say for our media and entertainment customers, it's been a conversation that's been happening in the industry for a very long time. Like I said, stream encryption was one of our first conversations in 1997 with Real Video on a 56K modem. Like anybody would want to see, steal that postage stamp, but whatever, that was our reality back in the, I think what's more interesting is, what's actually more interesting is actually on our enterprise side of the business, where we also have secure video requirements. I'm sharing, training with my distributors about a new product I'm launching next month, things like that. Again, the really fascinating thing about our business is all that security we've invested in, all those requirements that our media industry has driven for us is actually now being applied to another segment of the industry. And we find more and more enterprises that are acting like media companies that have these same requirements around security. And so it's really enabled us to come into that particular segment of the market that's embracing video to really drive their brands forward. And say, yeah, we got you covered, guys. This is this is the same stuff the studios have approved. This is the same things that major media companies are using. And it gives them that reassurance that, we have covered them relative to making sure that we have a great secure experience for their particular audience members.
Sure. Okay, great. Let me see. We've got a question or two that's come in. So let me turn to this question here. Is piracy always bad for business? If it exposes more people to certain content, can that potentially increase the likelihood that they'll be a subscriber in the future? And I think that gets back to that earlier question that we talked about, and that how do services make this decision to let it go and let it slide and hope they get the next subscriber, or to invest and ensure that that can't be done?
Yeah, always a good question. And, and there's frankly some regional aspects to those questions. We are much more privacy aware in Southeast Asia with our customers across that particular region. We have been, but again, it's a conversation with our customers, and each of them approach it a little bit differently. Like we talked about, across the industry, there has been historically this idea that, a little bit of credential sharing isn't necessarily bad. Audience acquisition is hard. And so if we see if this becomes our promotional, if we can get them hooked on that particular show or a particular genres of shows, how do we bring them in? We also see a lot of services that offer a lot of free content. You watch the first three episodes and then you tip in. Free trials actually work great. Our benchmark is like a 70.4% conversion rate on 7-day free trials into actually paying subscribers. Again, we're giving that away for free for a few days. We're getting them into the content and then they tip over. Interestingly, 14-day trials tend to drop about 10 percentage points on the conversion ratio. So 7 days seems to be the sweet spot, because maybe 14 days you can actually get through all of the whole show and things like that. So, these are the balances that we work through with our customers. And so some piracy, it's not an either or. It's not an absolute bad. It's not an absolute, and it's definitely not a good thing for our businesses. But it's finding the right balance.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about live and, the vulnerabilities here with live events. And so those, that type of content maybe having some different requirements. Can you explain, your perspective on what good or great protection would be for live content?
Yeah. So, a great question. It's really interesting. Again, it's a conversation with our customers. So as an example, of course, we can support DRM encryption, and we rotate keys every few seconds. And so you're always making sure that only that particular audience member can view that particular live stream. And that's super important for our customers, our sports customers. Obviously, we've got the World Cup coming up for some of our customers. These are all things that are part of the conversation point. At the same time, we have new technologies coming into the space. So as a great example, low latency live. So, Brightcove rolled out low latency live, and what we're solving, and a customer kind of best described it as the Twitter problem. If the tweet about the goal shows up before the stream actually shows it, everybody's angry. And so can we reduce that into kind of a 3 to 8 second delay from glass on the camera to glass on the screen for that consumer? But that has some trade-offs. DRM isn't quite there yet. And so we employ stream encryption. Is that okay for our customers? It's a conversation point, and it's a trade-off that we actually have to have with that. There's monetization that comes into that low latency live conversation. For our customers that sell a lot of their ads in-house, where we can just run out to the ad server and present that ad in stream, that's great. But when we get into programmatic ad networks that reach out to 10 or 12 different demand side platforms for an auction, is there enough time to actually get that ad back and not delay the stream at all, so that we're not adding latency along? So lots of good compromises that kind of happen along that way. But in general, live streams are as secure as VOD streams, and we can employ exactly the security our customers need to make sure they feel comfortable about that.
Okay, great. We do have another question that's come in, and it's back to the credentials about Adobe's Prime Account IQ system. So here's the question. With news about Adobe's Prime Account IQ system identifying and preventing households who share passwords, it's getting back to some similar topics, is account sharing becoming a form of piracy? And so I think, maybe the bigger question is, you've got these very large entities now really taking a closer look at this, perhaps that will really change the way people are viewing this moving forward. And so maybe are we at this point in time where the view of piracy really is going to be different? There's a lot of companies who are, looking to maintain their revenue and limit their losses. And do they see this as a way to be able to do that?
Yeah. So, I don't necessarily think that credential sharing by a paying customer today, that might be a good paying customer, is in the same bucket as piracy, where I'm grabbing the content and I'm throwing it out there on the web and anybody can download it and all the kind of traditional things we've thought about it. I like to think that it's a question for our customers relative to, you have a paying subscriber and they are maybe stretching the bounds of the terms of service. Maybe they are, but at the same time, if our monthly benchmark churn rate is at 7.6%, maybe just giving a little more utility to that by letting them share that with their, my mother-in-law, maybe, as it goes, maybe that keeps me subscribing for one more month and one more month and one more month. And so there's always a balance to be had there with our customers. I think that my personal preference is, it is an absolute way of growing revenue by acquiring new customers, by saying, hey, you guys got to, or increasing average revenue by increasing into a family plan. Got it. But can we do that in a positive way to say, hey, we see you're enjoying this service across lots of different devices. Maybe it's time to sign up for that family plan where you have a couple more available devices as part of your terms of service. And to approach them in a friendly way and nudge them into better behavior to increase that ARPU. You can also go the other way and just say, hey, it's pretty clear you guys are abusing our services and we need to shut that down. But again, our job as technologists is to provide the data and to provide those heuristics to say, we think this is a cohort of users that we might make an outreach to. And then it's up to the service provider themselves about how they want to treat those customers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing how quickly 30 minutes will go by, especially talking with you, Marty. I want to give you the chance to close out here with where you see the future of all this going. But I also want to note, interestingly, you said the word nudge a couple different times. My mom just gave me the book called Nudge to read, and encouraged me to read that, and understanding how little things that can be done. And I think there's some instances talking about the cafeteria and school children, and where you even place different foods to be able to kind of nudge them into making the decisions maybe that you'd like to see them make. So very interesting. Of course, also trust being a word that was on the screen with your slides there that you showed, and being, a critical component of any relationship, whether it's a business or personal relationship. And so really being able to strengthen the engagement with consumers through a trusted relationship, I think, is also critical. But let me give you a few moments here to share with us where you see the future of piracy and or the future of video going in the short term.
Yeah, I would say that it's a never-ending story, and it is something that every organization needs to invest in. I also don't believe that we are anywhere close to crisis mode. We are not back in the Napster days of audio sharing and things like that. I think that it's part of the business conversation that we have with our customers. It's about how they approach their particular audience and their customers and how they want to treat them. it's making sure that, of course, it's just a check mark to satisfy every content requirement from a studio, from a licensee that or licensor in terms of how that. So we get those check marks, and then we say, okay, what's the best policy for our audience to establish a good, healthy lifetime value with them over time? And it's always a fun conversation because there's no right answer. There is lots of possible answers, and it's our job to kind of advise our customers on what's possible and help them make the best decision for their particular business at any given time. So, we'll be talking about this next year, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this 10 years if I'm, if I haven't retired yet. So yes, as it goes. Yeah. And so that's kind of, how that never ending story goes for us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Marty, thank you so much. We very much appreciate your time and your support of Parks Associates events and research. And, you just bring such a wealth of experience. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. So if you'll hang with us for just a minute, we will be coming back with another conversation featuring some industry leaders, focused on losing millions or gaining eyeballs. So hang with us for just a second. We'll be right back.
Hello and welcome back to our Future of Video virtual session on piracy concerns. In this session, we will speak with industry leaders and content providers on how to protect the content from illegal streams and the trade-offs for that exposure. We've had some great conversations so far today, and we look forward to continuing that discussion in our next virtual session. Before we begin, let me introduce myself. I am Eric Sorensen. I'm a senior contributing analyst at Parks Associates within the entertainment team, and I cover the OTT streaming media services and the sports media landscape. I've worked in sports, media, news, and the entertainment space for almost 20 years. And during that time, I've worked on partnerships, product development, content development, and digital streaming strategies. I'm honored to be here today and discuss this important topic. So before we begin and bring in our panel for the discussion, I want to remind our audience about our poll questions that we will get to later in this discussion. And if you have any questions for our panel, please put them into the chat. So over the past 3 years, we have witnessed an increase in video piracy and account sharing behaviors. 40% of consumers and US internet households report engaging in some activity involving media piracy and password sharing, including illegal file downloads, sharing paid service passwords with others, which we just heard discussed, or using someone else's password. So this is up from 27% reporting the same behaviors in 2019. Netflix announced earlier this year it will be cracking down on password sharing in an attempt to generate more revenue to compensate from its subscriber loss. The service has launched an add a home feature in select international markets with an additional charge for each added home. Disney may be the next to crack down on password sharing. Disney recently sent out a questionnaire to subscribers in Spain asking them if and why they are sharing their Disney Plus password with people outside of their own household. Password sharing has not been a focal point of many services, in part because services were in a fast and furious growth phase during the height of the pandemic. However, US subscriber growth is beginning to slow, and many services like Netflix are looking to expand into new revenue-generating business models. So many services may be taking a wait and see if password sharing fees actually works for Netflix. However, the data indicates that nearly half of those who pirated content eventually subscribed to a service they once used for free. This does not necessarily mean that 49% subscribe to every service they pirate. It just proves that there is hope for converting people accessing content through unauthorized means to paid services. This really presents an interesting proposition for the service providers and content owners. If a service knows a consumer tested at a pirated stream and then subscribed, determining if a budget is necessary for anti-piracy measures presents business models and content protection strategy challenges. One way services are protecting their content from password sharing is by limiting the number of concurrent streams inside and outside the consumer's home. When a streamer tries to log into the service and has surpassed the number of streams allocated, the consumer receives a message that they are streaming on too many devices and the service prevents access. 15% of passwords that 15% of all OTT subscribers have received this message. And of those consumers who share their password, that number jumps to over a third of all consumers who share their passwords have been locked out of a service for too many concurrent streams. One thing we know is that password sharing is on the minds of top services. And to find out the impact of password sharing and pirated content, I'm honored to discuss this topic with our panel today. So before we bring them into the panel, let me introduce them. First on our panel today, we have Tim Cutting, who is the GM of Commercial Real Good. We have Serhad Dokin, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Adia. Olga Kornienko, co-founder and CEO of EasyDRM. And Shurik Samadar, who is the Manager of Consumer Solutions at Akamai Technologies. And from Warner Media, we have Peter Scott, who is the VP of Emerging Media and Innovation. And last but not least, we have Lau Zoidevelt, who is the Product Director for Cybersecurity and Anti-Piracy at Iridetto. So first up in our panel today will be Tim. Tim Cutting, are you there? Can you tell us a little bit about Real Good, maybe a little bit about yourself and what Real Good does?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having us on the panel today. Real Good is the best way to describe it as a modern interpretation of the TV Guide. And so Real Good is an app company. We focus on the customer user experience at search and discovery and finding content. And so rather than always just kind of take my word for it, the best thing you can do to learn about Real Good is actually to download the app, try it out, and you'll see for yourself kind of what a modern guide looks like for streaming. That's what we focus on. And so Real Good is a tech and data company. First and foremost, that's how we gather our data, working with the partners to bring in feeds, automate the data into our search and discovery experience, and to provide a real-time look into everybody's catalog for the purpose of these consumers finding content in a content-first type experience. The privilege I have is licensing much of the data out to other companies that are looking to have either a similar experience or help with their guides as well. So we work with everyone from tier 1 to SMB to help them, again, either bring the data into their products to enhance their guides, or for content analytics and to better understand and research the landscape of streaming, of what's on where, whose catalogs are shrinking or growing, where maybe this competitor is placing an investment, or this, or even looking at their own catalogs through kind of a third-party dashboard. So that's really who we are. We focus, again, like I said, on the real-time delivery and the quality of the data. We have a lot of fun being a B2C company and trying to serve customers' needs around finding all this content in this fragmented landscape. And then again, we have a business side helping other businesses solve some similar problems.
Well, we certainly thank you for being here, and look forward to sort of hearing your insights on piracy and how you guys may be addressing it with some of the products that you work with. Next on our panel, we also have Serhad Doken, who is from Adia. Serhad, can you tell us a bit about your background and what Adia does for your clients?
Sure, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invitation, Eric. This is a really interesting topic. So my name is Serhad. I'm the CTO at Adia. We're a public company. We're listed at NASDAQ, about 900 million revenue. There are four markets, distinct markets that we focused on. First is pay TV, then over-the-top video streaming services, consumer electronic devices, and the last one is social media. As it so happens that we are separating into two public companies by October the 3rd. So we will be listed on NASDAQ under the name of Adia. We are spinning off Xperi. My role at Adia is I'm in charge of the technology strategy roadmap, and my focus is advanced R&D projects to solve industry's tough technical issues for tomorrow. That will be the underlying enabler of new products and services for the unmet consumer demand. This is a really interesting and crucial topic for the over-the-top video streaming industry, so happy to be here.
Well, we are excited for you and your potential public offering. So congratulations on that, and thank you for being part of our panel today. We look forward to your insights. Next on our panel is Olga Kordienko, and she joins us from EasyDRM. Hi, Olga. Welcome in. Can you tell us what EasyDRM does? What do you guys do for your clients?
Sure. Hi, Eric. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Olga Kornienko, and we're with EasyDRM. I'm the co-founder and COO, and we are a hosted managed DRM as a service company. We are the first cloud-based DRM company, and we focus only on one thing and one thing only. And we have been taking this approach since 2003. The idea was to set up an infrastructure that allows our clients to use a security service that at that point, 2003, right, was a very dark, black, scary box of, secrets. And we wanted to make it simple, and we wanted to make it straightforward. So we've been doing that for quite some time. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here, and certainly look forward to your insights on I guess the professional side of piracy and what DRMs can actually do. So thanks for being here. And next in our panel is Shurik Samadar, who is the manager of consumer solutions at Akamai Technology. And Shurik, thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little about your background and then maybe what Akamai does?
Sure. So thanks for having me today, Eric. So Akamai came into inception back in '98. And then so over the 20 plus years being in the market, so Akamai has matured from content delivery platform. Then they ventured into streaming video in early 2000s. Then security has been a big focus for us since the last decade. And then we have rounded it off with the acquisition of Linode this year, with the primary focus of target market, which is alternative cloud. And so Akamai has a major presence when we are talking about the internet world, and our customer base is across various industries. And from media standpoint, we basically, and that's the team that I'm part of course, which is streaming services, the direct-to-consumer platform and cloud platforms, publishing, gaming, and software. And so I'm part of the leadership team for global services and operations, where we are basically partnering with strategic media.
We may have lost him there for a second. I will likely move on here to introduce our next panelist, if we can do that, and then we'll try to get him back in. So let's jump to Peter Scott. So Peter Scott joins us from Warner Media, where he is the VP of Emerging Media and Innovations. I mean, that is a title, Peter. So tell us what Emerging Media and Innovations at Warner Media means.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great opportunity to work now at Warner Media Discovery, now that we're merged with Discovery, and we're always trying to figure out new businesses, new technologies that can, create KPIs or basically keep everything secure. So I have this great job where I work across primarily the sports group, where we have relationships with the NBA, March Madness, NHL, MLB, and now U.S. men's and women's soccer. And I'm looking forward to the discussion because it is important to us as being stewards of these wonderful IPs and our own IP through HBO Max and our security team at Warner Brothers, to basically protect our content as much as we can. And, we want to take responsibility, just like our partners, to do the best job we can to protect our content. So, I have this great job to go and find the most interesting companies that are in this space, bring them back into our company, test some scenarios out in a sandbox environment, and try to choose and pick the best vendors.
We are excited to hear your insights today, especially as it relates to pirated sports content. So I can't wait to sort of hear you speak on that a little bit. Next on our panel, and last but not least, is Lau Zoidefeld from Iridetto. Hi, Lau. Are you there?
Hi, Eric. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lau Zoidefeld. Last name is Dutch, so quite difficult to pronounce.
Did I do it right?
Yeah, close. Yeah. I work for Iridetto. We have a long history in the content security space. So we provide basically services and solutions. A lot of them is security still for the video entertainment, but also video games, connected industry spaces. And then my role as product director is for cybersecurity and anti-piracy, is a lot to do with our media customers to help them to protect their revenue and protect their assets. And yeah.
Well, also excited to have you. I mean, I really certainly was excited when I learned about this panel and the fact that we had so many different perspectives. I think we will have it covered. At this point, I'd like to sort of bring all of our panel together and make sure that everybody is connected. And I want to say Zoom, but we're not a product Zoom. So make sure that everybody's zoomed in. I guess that's a verb now, I guess, right? So again, I appreciate all of you being here, and I don't want to waste too much more time. So I do want to sort of get right into the line of questions as it relates to piracy and piracy concerns. As I've mentioned to you guys, I want this to be an open discussion. So feel free to jump in if you feel like one of your colleagues here has said something that you want to add to or agree or disagree with. But when we first started talking about this topic, we recognized that there's several forms of piracy. There's consumer-driven piracy via credential sharing, and then there's sort of this other idea of professional entities that capture and distribute stolen content, which is also, another form of cybersecurity as well. So when we sort of think about piracy and the overall landscape of it, I'd love to sort of hear from Shurik about what you think is the most impactful part of piracy on the industry.
Yeah, so when we are looking from the lens of consumer-driven piracy, I think like it has there is fair bit of positivity in there, in the sense that when we are looking at account-driven credentials sharing, that's mostly happens with probably family members and friends. And Eric, you mentioned about Netflix is targeting about like how they can control that. So that tackling is easier as well. Like, if you're looking from the lens of like, where the requests are coming from, like, within a given household or beyond that, that tackling is also easier. So in my opinion, capturing and distributing stolen content is much more impactful. And there are two folds to it. So from one angle, it's a very enterprise-based risk. and what we refer to as enterprise under attack. So, and the reason why it is that way, because the malicious actors are actually attacking customers' infrastructure. So one of the solutions that we recommend to our customers is to go zero trust way to build their enterprise around it. And the other aspect, the other angle to call out here is for the premium content, how that gets stolen and the IP prominence of that gets muddled. And so for that particular scenario, we have monitoring solutions to address monitoring rights and playback infringement type of issues. We also help with proxy detection and watermarking solutions. So again, tying back to the question, I think capturing and the distributed stolen content is much more impactful in nature.
Olga, what sort of do you think? I guess as we talked earlier, obviously this is another piece of your business more so than the password side, correct?
Yes, definitely. We do see a number of different ways of piracy. On our side, we are basically more on the prevention of piracy things and trying to stop everything. But we did a survey, and we actually, over the course of last summer, and we actually came across the fact that it's actually pretty even as far as our clients see from what types of levels of piracy they're affected by. And there's a lot of professional piracy where providers lose content to a professional Cody box type of a situation. But there's a lot of other things where it is very small password sharing situations. But it's interesting that the level of impact that our people who filled out the survey, they talked about is it's pretty equal among both the professional and the non-professional side of things.
So Lau, I know sort of this is also an area that you focus on a little bit, but when you're thinking about detecting piracy, right, or really more what are effective means for detecting credential sharings? Maybe we start there and then go into the professional pirate side a little bit.
Yeah, it used to be quite a popular method is to use the IP address to kind of get an idea of where somebody's accessing the services. The problem with that is, as Marty mentioned in the previous talk, is there's a lot of very valid reasons why people will have multiple IP addresses. So either they can go to their holiday homes, they could be traveling for business, and that could still be in the territory where they're allowed to watch the services. So that shouldn't be a problem. So what we see lately is that a lot of customers are starting to be more interested to combine that geo information with behavioral statistics. So what people are typically accessing a subscriber, or then which kind of devices access the content over time, and then try to get a baseline out of what does a legitimate customer look like. A subscriber is somebody that's not sharing the credentials, and then try to pick off the anomalies and out of that big data to kind of spot which accounts are being either sold without the subscriber actually knowing, or in some cases obviously the subscriber sharing the credentials with family and friends and so on.
So I know we sort of jumped in to try to identify these two areas of professional piracy and password sharing, but I want to go to Peter. And Peter, when we spoke earlier, you brought up the idea that how much do publishers really care about piracy as it relates to password sharing? So I wanted you to sort of share your perspective on that from a content side.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just becomes, there's a lot of good discussions from Marty earlier, from Bright Cove is, where do they see the shrinkage? Use the analogy of a department store, there's amount of shrinkage that people will give up. I think it's really, where does it hit you in the pocketbook? Someone has to accurately tell you where they're seeing streams being, sort of intercepted, whether that's multiple social sites that are telling folks where to go, or even as simple as BuzzFeed when you're looking for an NBA game that you don't have to go through League Pass. I think there has to be more accuracy to motivate publishers to basically say, how much of my bottom line am I losing ultimately to shrinkage in the marketplace? And I think until there is motivation, and there are big hard numbers, I think people sort of take it for granted because there has to be an investment made on the security side. There's some great companies, here on this conversation today. We use a couple good ones, video sites that does some watermarking. Also, another company called VFT Solutions that actually identifies and goes into social accounts and notices that people are sharing accounts and tries to push them into signing up for the account in a legal way. So I think it's a combination of really the guy or gal or company that owns the IP, whether it's a leak or us like Harry Potter or Wonder Woman. Where do we see the shrinking? Are we accurately tracking that? And if we are, how do we go back to internal resources and say, we're losing X amount of dollars, and so therefore how important that is to the bottom line, and then what kind of companies on this panel today, and how much money and resources do we want to invest on it? And it really, until that's accurate and people, sort of believe in that, that's what's going to change. I think there are a lot of conversations where sometimes it's better to kind of let a little bit out. You don't have to pay as much money for marketing purposes, and then suddenly the conversion for seeing people. So I just think there has to be more accuracy and actually more passion to create the resources to protect these streams. I think that's sort of questionable for some publishers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it, and Marty Roberts of Bright Cove hit on it earlier as well with Elizabeth in her discussion, which is, when we think about letting some of it out the door, I think it's the next question of, how accurate is it to what you're saying on, and then do publishers need to put a budget behind it? And so, Tim, I wanted to sort of ask you, as you thought about earlier when we were discussing the idea of casual piracy, and what does that actually, where does that sort of fit into this whole dynamic of pirated content?
Yeah, well, I mean, as we have kind of a unique angle on this panel because we're more of a customer experience company. We build this contemporary search guide. A couple of thoughts come to mind. One, what are we doing about it? I mean, we work with the service providers and we plumb directly to the service providers. So there are some folks out there that look like a real good, but go and plumb into file-based sharing, other types of content. Those obviously can be used or abused by the casual provider. But I think from a real good, the first thing to say is we plumb directly to the service providers. So there's a direct, paid or free service at the end of the search guide of real good. The second thing, though, that I know we talked about prior was personalization. And I think that the user experience is often overlooked in the piracy conversation. Everybody thinks a little more about locked door. How do you keep the door locked? How do you, authenticate who walks through that locked door? But I think, to the casual participant in streaming, having a great user experience that is personalized to you both is an attraction. It's also a deterrent. The last thing you want to do as somebody that is password sharing or account sharing is show up and have a bunch of user recommendations and your entire screen painted for a toddler or a child if you're an adult, or somebody that's into horror genres and all you're trying to do is find other content. So, it may be a more, lighter aspect of security, but I say a strong personalization approach to your streaming guide will deter some folks from wanting to show up in somebody else's user experience.
So I think that sort of leads me into sort of the next question, which is as we think about not just the personalization, but the actual service and platforms that people subscribe to. And the previous panels, there was a little talk about AVOD and fast services. So as we think about providers introducing those types of services, Shirag, what are your thoughts on that potentially helping to reduce piracy, offering that as a service tier?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Eric. I want to take a step back and maybe talk about a couple of data points from the contextual aspect. I mean, first of all, we got to accept the fact that any content, whether it's very premium, exclusive, anytime is available, anytime on the internet. So don't quote me on these numbers, but last year, $11.6 billion were lost because people pirated content, and they downloaded 127 billion shows. So over the top is a young industry. It's still evolving. We all want it to grow and thrive, and we have to look at it from different angles. The first business model that OTT started with was SWAT. Now we have FAST and AWOD coming. So we talked about credential sharing. I'd like to think of this more of it's a customer acquisition cost, right? And we've seen a lot of video service, over-the-top video services really ramp up by partnering with operators. So there were a lot of like revenue sharing deals that were behind those deals. You may say like the traction that Disney got was thanks to some of those lead gen efforts by partnering with other organizations. So when the market is growing, not many people really pay attention to credential sharing, but when growth stalls, then you have to pay attention to more because you're looking for more revenue sources. I mean, we've heard we will never have ads, then we're going to have ads. It's similar to like Steve Jobs said, iPad size is 10 inches, that's the best. And after he died, a year or two, you got a 7-inch iPad, right? Fed says inflation is transitory 6 months ago, and now it's not. But we also look at the have to look at the alternative, right? So once you have credential sharing, password sharing, then you actually have that user, and you got a grace period to upsell that user. And upsell may happen in many different ways. If I'm at a hotel and if I'm experiencing HBO Max for 2 days when I'm there, maybe I really like it and I want to sign up. So we have to make those services appealing during that limited window of upsell grace period, and we should do that in phases, right? It all comes down to know your customer. I mean, if you were to dissect the issue, right, there are different stakeholders here. For instance, let's say Eric is sharing his credentials with me. Now, what's the relationship between me and Eric? And let's say he likes Taekwondo movies and I like Thai cooking. There's a period that the service provider can get to know me and then offer me uh, different personalization aspects, different recommendation methods to convert me into a paying user. And content is king. I feel content is like oxygen, and people generally would want to sign up, but there's certain like different segmentations of users, right? There's one class that they're cost conscious. They will always use the free password that you give them. And also maybe if Eric is giving me his password, he should have a lot of trust in me, right? Maybe I'm not going to be as careful with that password as he is. And there's that whole rabbit hole that you can go to, who's going to have access to my password and who's going to give that to his friend and of his friend, and then you can't really come back from that. And there's a very sophisticated user, right? They subscribe to 4 to 5 to 6 direct-to-consumer services, and they thrive in finding the content wherever they are. But sometimes they're frustrated, right? They can't really find the content. So then they're actually expert searchers of where that pirated content is, right? So when you look at who is the lesser evil, the alternative of getting content from a pirated site, illegal site, versus someone getting access to content through password sharing. Obviously, the latter is better, and you have the option to upsell that person. So it's part of the customer acquisition cost and lead gen. So whole objective should be to start from free to freemium to eventually to premium, and enable the users to use them as like word of mouth, right? Send your friends the free trial period or episodes. Maybe you should think about microtransactions. Maybe I want to send 2 episodes to Eric as a gift from me, right? And then invest more in personalization and recommendations. And in fact, some of the pirate sites, they do a much better job, right? If I wanted to search for movies from 2021 or 2022 or from this particular actor in 2021, it's really easy. But when I go to legal sites, somehow that's very difficult because maybe they don't have a lot of 2021 movies, and
Sure.
getting recommendations from review sites are difficult. So it all goes back to me in terms of know your customer and build a profile. And obviously you can employ a lot of technology, AI, machine learning behind it.
So that's the customer journey you're speaking of, right? So how you know, sort of the customer acquisition piece and build them up to the service. I know, I wanted to give Olga sort of the chance here because you said something when we spoke earlier, which is the human behavior that drives somebody to piracy. And I think there's two pieces to that. As I went back to sort of think about what you said, one of those is, and I'd love to get everybody involved in this topic as we sort of, I don't want to say backtrack, but maybe go back to the beginning here. What are the drivers that sort of cause somebody to want to pirated content? And then secondly, for the rest of the group to think about while Olga's answering this is, where's the education piece? How do we educate consumers about the idea that they are using pirated content? So Olga, I'll start with you.
Sure. So yeah, it is something that I always talk about and I always think about. We need to take what is going on in the world of piracy and take a note and see why people are actually pirating and figure out what it is that drives them to do it. So like when the pandemic first started, the most pirated movie was Contagion, and everybody was watching Contagion for about 2 weeks. And then people got completely scared because it was live and they stopped watching it. And that was the most pirated movie for weeks, but it wasn't really available anywhere. And if it was, maybe it wasn't available in a large, easily financially accessible situation or whatever. But it's keeping in mind of things like that. And it's basically paying attention to the logic of it. Like when we travel, and now that we're starting to travel again, why can't I view the content I'm allowed to view in the US when I'm abroad? I'm a US subscriber with a US billing address and a zip code. Why can't I view my content in a foreign country? I had a business trip that had 4 different countries in it, and I couldn't watch one show continuously because it was available here, but not there, but not here. And I end up in a position where I have to consider whether or not I want to connect to a VPN to have a continuous viewing experience and not have to jump from show to show to show. And that is something that needs to be taken into account if we want to try to combat piracy in the grand scheme of things. And just kind of to add on to that, I also mentioned that we did a survey last year, and we had a question of, as a business, which rules are you setting on your content? And as a consumer, which rules do you not want to see on the content? And ironically enough, those things matched. So when you are traveling, the businesses want to lock things down, and I guess contracts and whatnot's involved. But as a consumer, you really do not want to be locked in to all of those rules and restrictions and whatnot. It's kind of a very interesting situation we have going on.
Sure. And that probably leads to the education piece of like, hey, why don't I have access to Netflix, this show in Europe when I do in the US, right? So I think, Lau, maybe it sounds like you want to jump in here and give a little feedback on what can services be doing, or what should providers be doing to provide that education piece on, so that consumers aren't looking for VPNs or pirated content to get access.
Yeah, I think it's becoming more and more difficult. So if we look at the pirate sites now compared to 10 and 15 years ago, pirates have evolved quite a lot. So if you look at their services now, some of them, to the average person out there, they would not know that they're actually subscribing to a pirate service. The service, how it's made up, the websites, the billing, even the billing mechanisms, and how people can actually pay for the services, and how they can consume it. I mean, there's iOS, there's Android applications. It's available on multiple platforms. So there's a lot of money that does go back into they trying to effectively compete with the legitimate broadcasters and operators out there. So I think it's becoming really difficult for the average consumer now to know that they are actually subscribing to something that is actual legal, or it's a piracy. So it's more and more important for operators and broadcasters to actually educate the public, so that they actually know where they can find content. But on the earlier topic, one thing that drives piracy a lot too is that the exclusive content that's available on specific platforms. So to get somebody to subscribe to every single subscription service that is available to them, to be able to see all the different types of content is really difficult. So content aggregation becomes key there. How do you actually collect a lot of that content together and kind of make it available to the consumers? But it is tough for sure.
Anyone else have any thoughts on sort of the?
Yeah, I want to.
Yeah. Go ahead, Olga.
I'm sorry. I wanted to add on to Lau's comment. I do know people who I've actually had conversations with like that, where I said, you can absolutely not watch all of the content like Disney and Netflix and Paramount on one streaming service. It doesn't exist. And this person looked at me, batted her eyes, and said, I don't understand why. I have this and I pay for it. And look at it. It's a beautiful app. And I think that's the part that goes to education, is that I sat there and I had to explain to this person that it doesn't work that way. And it is a pirated site, and she just didn't understand that. But how could it be a pirated site? Because it is beautiful and it functions and it's paid for. And I think that is a major issue that we have to address in this industry.
Well, I think Olga is hitting at something that I know Real Good focuses on, which is universal search, having a content first experience, right? And I think Olga's comments are very telling, right? When a consumer is saying a pirate site has a more attractive user experience than these fragmented paid experiences where I go into HBO, I leave HBO, I go into Netflix, I leave Netflix, right? And it starts to become a pain in the ass just to find a simple piece of content during the holidays for a family or a child that's been saying, go find content, but don't make me pay $4 again for rental because I'm already spending $60 a month, right? And I think, again, when you have a consumer first attitude and you're building experiences for them first and then figuring out the business behind it, I think you tend to yield better results for these consumers. And it comes back to convenience. Is it going to be convenient to get what I want, or is it more convenient to steal it, right? I mean, we've all lived through the MP3 days. Now we're in the video days. Compression is there. It's no longer just a big file size that's keeping you from maybe pirating. And so it's competitive. Legit services have to compete with illegitimate services on the user experience.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think from a user or consumer-based standpoint, where the education is probably missing is they are making their own devices vulnerable to pirated content, even for account sharing credential scenario, because sharing of passwords can lead to their accounts getting hacked, and then a lot of issues can happen beyond that streaming platform, right? So that sort of education gap is there. And then from business standpoint, I think one important element to look at it is customers are probably not just looking at just your premium content, they are looking for sort of diversification. So that's where the tiered approach of AVOD versus SVOD comes into play. That's where the stickiness of the service comes into play. See the way a lot of streaming platforms are tying up with, say, telecom providers and probably giving a bundled solution. And also Amazon does it Prime versus the retail experience. So it's a very different experience, but that stickiness very much comes into play. So that sort of diversification, that sort of ecosystem from business standpoint, I think that will also help building that consumer base, building in the stickiness in that consumer base.
And that's I'm not sure I've heard anybody say it yet, but that's sort of the aggregator model, right? If we provide more stuff into an aggregator model that would allow consumers to find all of their content. But do we feel like the aggregators that are out there today, and Tim, not to undercut what you guys are doing there, but is there enough there that's actually helping to prevent piracy from an aggregator model? Or do we need other pieces, such as, we talked when we met earlier, the idea of an a la carte model to where I could just pay for Stranger Things, right? Now, maybe Peter, what are your thoughts on an a la carte model for, let's say, from your perspective, a you just want to pay for the NBA season on TNT or TBS, right? What are your thoughts on sort of going that way, and would that help the piracy challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it as one day where you'll go to an OTT platform or something where every sports that you can possibly get is in one OTT player. And then the authentication will be done by Adobe Pass, B2C, whatever it may be, so that customers, I think Olga's always hitting it on the head. It's like, why are they desperate to steal the content? Why are we not making it easier for them to get the content? And I think if we all could agree with the different business models, so if you had one large sports OTT platform that had all the sports from around the world, and you could go in and authenticate with those particular those authentication partners in those different markets. So someone comes in, their geolocation, for this particular being able to watch the NFL in Norway, you authenticate with this company, and all that sort of taken care of in one sort of bucket. I think I could see that all going there one day, because I just think more and more we make it so difficult for people to understand, and all they want to do is just watch the content. But because of business reasons, right, multiple business reasons that sort of keep traditional and future media businesses alive, I don't think it's a disservice to the customer. But I think there's a way, and I think technology is like the Uber sports OTT platform, and all the credentialing and authentication that we would get from ESPN3 or from 11 Sports or anywhere around the world. I think that we might see that one day, sooner than you think, because everybody will still get paid. It's just there'll be a centralized place where you can get the content.
Sir, any thoughts on sort of a model like that?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to double click on what other speakers talked about in terms of enforced scarcity of the content due to B2B agreements, right? So if someone is going through an acquisition process or a divestiture process, or then the content becomes unavailable. And I'm talking about licensed content, right? So someone already paid for the subscription, but they can get the third season of the show over here, but not the second season and the first season there. And then in 3 months, it just goes away, right? So the consumers then are frustrated. They just want to get to the content. So the super aggregator model is an interesting model, but also there are lessons to be learned from linear TV, right? The reason that people are cutting cord is because they're subscribing to a lot of channels that they're not interested in. So I think there is room for experimentation there. What I see a lot of success in the over-the-top world is a lot of niche content, right? A couple of months ago, I was talking to someone who is in the streaming business for outdoor enthusiasts, right? Fishing, hunting, and they're having a really nice time bringing new customers, signing them up. So I think aggregate, but also disaggregate at the same time. Make that kind of ethnic content and niche content available to the consumers. And I mean, some of the successes that we've seen with like content from South Korea, etc., that enabled new content owners to get more eyeballs globally.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I do want to remind our audience about the poll question. And then we also have some questions from our audience. So I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to see which one of you reacts first and is ready to answer. So can you touch on the laws in place that are meant to deter infringement of copyright? And are these enforced? Who wants to try to take that one?
I'll take a crack.
Okay.
I mean, people tend to sometimes pigeonhole like certain countries or certain zip codes. Oh, well, all the piracy is happening here, right? So that may be true, but I don't want to like create a pariah of something, right? And even when you know that, whether those rules and regulations or in foreign jurisdictions, whether they can be like fully enforced, I'm doubtful of that. But before even going overseas, right? Even Netflix said about 30 million of the password sharing is happening here, or there's a lot of content privacy happening in US, Canada, and Europe. Maybe you can start by like cleaning up the house here. Education comes into picture, as it was mentioned before. When someone is actually watching pirated content, they're opening themselves up to a lot of other issues, right? Someone can take control of your device, your network, and then launch attacks somewhere else. And one day you may see FBI knocking on your door without you even knowing what's going on. So I think there's a lot of education necessary there. And let's start from our own house, and then once that's like squeaky clean, then that could be best practices that can be applied elsewhere.
Sure. It sounded like you were going to try to jump in there. Sure. Did you have something you wanted to say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, one of the issues that we tackle quite a bit with streaming based customers is credential stuffing. And credential stuffing is basically arising from the fact, how folks are getting their accounts vulnerable, by sharing and whatnot. So I think the that aspect is important. But touching on the main question that came up, so I think it also depends, when we are trying to solve the problem, it also depends, how our consumer base is. The consumer base in US is very different as compared to APAC. APAC is a lot more, especially places like India and all, the eyeballs are more on mobile devices, whereas in US, especially for premium content, the content is actually getting delivered through devices like your gaming consoles or your Apple TVs and whatnot, where it's probably tied to the Wi-Fi services. So the way you can control the issues, in place like US versus APAC, is very different, because the consumer base, their behaviors are very different. So the education will be very different as well.
So we didn't really touch on budgets or providers, allocating budgets to piracy. But, as we sort of look at our poll question, the first poll question was, what is your perception of piracy and anti-piracy? And from our respondents, 33% said it's an expense. 67% said it's a way to recover lost revenue. So as we think about sort of those two pieces of it, and then obviously 0% said we have other priorities. So as you think about the priorities, we've sort of looked at piracy as a way to recover lost revenue, but there's an investment here. And what do you think, or sort of as you think about that investment and the shrinkage going out the door, where do you start, Peter? What are your thoughts on where you would start?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think you just got to make the person who owns the IP, they just basically bake it into their rights fee, right? So if you're distributing, Game of Thrones, that's a bad example, but if you're distributing NBA League Pass and you're distributing it to multiple people, it should be the league's responsibility to build a security team because it's their IP, but then bake that into the rights fee, because the rights fee would have all these different rights that you can do, but there's a security fee. And if everybody is contributing to the security feed, in turn, they're basically helping each other in that ecosystem, because there's 100 partners, for the NBA around the world. And if one person screws up, then we're all screwed, right? So I think you have to look at the IP holders, their distribution partners. And my personal opinion is you bake it into the rights fee, where there is an allotted amount of money that is being contributory by the distributor and rights holder that pays the IP holder to protect, because in essence, they want to protect that investment because that distributor is trying to make money on that. So that's where I would do it, because I think it's cleaner. And yes, it might be 2, 4, 5% more, but I think everybody would agree that if the IP holder is being responsible to protect that content and everybody's willing to contribute that, I think that might be a way that, instead of building separate budgets and all those other things that make it difficult in teams, just do it at the source. That would be my suggestion.
That hasn't traditionally been the model, right? So
No,
if you think about ESPN protecting their content, right, through Piracy and working with some of the partners that are on this panel, right? Like that, it's not the right holders. It's not the Big 12, the SEC network, or the NFL or the NBA.
Right. But I think if they're gonna keep demanding these rights increases, they kind of have to take responsibility of being sort of protective of their own IP. And I think they can. I think that's normal. And I think all their partners would contribute to that in some way, in some form. I just, as this leakage happens, you're disturbing revenue streams, and revenue is so important to all this. I think it's, at least in my opinion, I think it's the IP holder. And I think people like us as rights holders would be happy to pay for that if we knew there was going to be no shrinkage out on BuzzFeed that would say, hey, go over here. It's like, no, it's all good, because the way the NBA has protected that stream and basically delivered that stream to that distributor, it's all locked in and good to go. So that's right.
We sort of circle back to premium content and
I
sports
also,
content. Olga, yeah, please jump in.
And I also,
Go ahead,
I guess, have a question. One of the things that Peter mentioned earlier, and I apologize for technical difficulties. My computer decided to be difficult this morning. So one of the things that Peter mentioned earlier is that if we had a number of what things cost and how much piracy or how much content walks out the door with piracy. But I guess the question becomes, if we know that, let's say, $1 million a month walks out the door and it costs $500,000 to secure it, that's basically you getting back $500,000 a month. I mean, I'm just pulling random numbers, right? Yeah. But getting numbers around actual shrinkage would get any sort of anti-piracy measures altogether.
I think we lost.
Do
you
we
a
actually
little bit
have
there,
that
but I
information?
think you're making the point that spending the dollars to protect piracy still provides a profitable benefit, right?
This is the return of investment.
Return on investment. Yeah.
Question, which everybody always asks, and it's so difficult to answer that question. But yes, if ultimately someone spends $1, how much are they actually going to make back in return? And it's really complicated because there are so many factors.
Well, I think we are down. Let me get to this last poll question. I think we are down. If I'm looking at my my clock correctly, we are down to the last 2 minutes here. But I have one more poll question that I just wanted to read the results from, and then I'll let everybody go, which is, what is the best approach to minimizing password sharing? And 50% of our audience said that offer free ad-based tiers, which we talked about a little bit. But, again, if it was free, I wouldn't need to share my password. But then from perspective of content owners and those who own the IP, how are you not protecting your premium content? So I knew that we weren't going to solve the issue today, but I certainly appreciate everybody's insights and discussions on our panel today, and really appreciate your feedback and your direction on this conversation. I think we look forward to having you guys back. And maybe as when we readdress this topic, we'll be further along in some of the business models that are out there. So thank you all again for being a participant in this panel. And we wish you guys all the best of the day. I've got a couple other slides here that I'm going to go through, and then we'll close everything up. But thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So again, I want to thank our panel for being here. I want to thank all of our panelists today and both of our panel discussions. We enjoyed all of your insights delivered from all your different perspectives. And we at Parks Associates in the audience are truly grateful for your time. We'd also like to let the audience know that our next Future of Video session will take place in person in Marina del Rey, California, where we will be continuing to present new research and address trending topics in the video service market. Be sure to join us in December for that session. We do want to let you know that much of the research that we shared with you today can be found in our upcoming quantified consumer deck on account sharing and piracy. This consumer-focused report examines consumer preferences for various piracy behaviors, as well as attitude towards piracy and account sharing. So if you're interested in obtaining this research, please reach out to Jason Paris on our sales team. Also, in case you were not aware, we offer custom content marketing services with sponsorship white papers, webinars, and podcasts that are all grounded in our Parks Associates data. So if you would like more information on sponsorship opportunities for upcoming future video sessions in 2022 or 2023, if you want to inquire about our research or speak at future video events, please reach out to Ashton, Jason, or Mindy Sue to discuss the possibilities and details. Again, I think we had a great overall day on piracy and anti-piracy discussions, and I want to give a big thank you to our panelists and sponsors. We hope to see you all in person at our next future video session taking place in December 12th through the 14th out in California. Thank you again for your time today. We hope you learned as much as I did, and take care.
Since empty offices, video conferencing, and virtual events, working together in new ways, and finding unique ways of connecting with each other, we at Parks Associates are excited to see you face-to-face to collaborate, network, and innovate. We've brought back in-person conferences in 2022. Join us in December for the next in-person Future of Video, OTT, pay TV, and digital media. We look forward to seeing you soon.